Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.
To all who shall see these presents, greetings. On behalf of Marine Corps University, the Marine Corps University Foundation, and the Brute Krulak Center for Innovation and Future Warfare, welcome back to the Brutecast, our series designed to connect the worlds of the warfighter and PME with the best in innovative and creative thought. I'm your host, Major Nate Janikin, Operations Officer at the Krulak Center. Before we begin, please remember that all opinions expressed here are those of the individual and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Krulak Center, Marine Corps University, United States Marine Corps, or any other agency of the U.S. government. So welcome back. This is our third episode in a series that I've titled Navigating Complexity, looking at the conflict between Israel and Hamas. And at this point, we're at day 19 of the conflict, which started back with the attack from Hamas on Israel on October 7th. Since the beginning of that conflict, Israel has reported about 1,400 deaths, and this was as of Tuesday, so that's likely higher. And the Hamas-run health ministry, so we can, whether the numbers are accurate or not is a different conversation, but they're reporting over 5,700 Palestinians killed, and they obviously aren't breaking it out between members of Hamas and regular Palestinians. And Israel reported early this morning that there are believed to be about 224 hostages. And since the beginning of the conflict, I've only seen about 4 that have been released. 2 Americans last Friday, and then 2 elderly Israeli citizens that were released on Monday. And then late last night, the prime minister announced that there would be a land operation. I believe he even went so far as to say that they even had a time set. And obviously he didn't say what that time was. So, sir, welcome back.
Thank you.
Hopefully the series will end sooner than later, but until it does, we'll continue talking about it. So I think the big question would be that statement there's been a lot of statements. I've seen different things out of the United Nations. I know the EU met yesterday and made some comments. The UN Secretary General basically said that, hey, they disagree with Hamas and what they've done, but then they did make some small accusations against Israel as well, saying that, hey, this situation was perpetuated a little bit by the treatment of Gaza and Palestine by the Israelis, which obviously the Israelis condemned those comments pretty quickly after they were made. So sir, I just wanted to kick it over to you then, maybe make Prime Minister Netanyahu's comments, the UN comments, and kind of where we are, geopolitically at this point.
Okay. Again, greetings to our viewers and listeners. I hope also that this series that we have ends with a victory and an end of terrorism, and also hopefully and this is important to understand, that this war would not end with even if Hamas is dismantled militarily, as it is Israel's goal, without a further political settlement of the Palestinian question. But we'll leave that aside right now. To your questions, I think what is important to understand, that this war, and everybody knows it, but we have to, in my view, highlight it as we keep on discussing this war, that information operations is central and critical in this. This is a war that is being fought. Either side is using their own information, and as you said, the numbers, for example, the hospital, Al Ahli Hospital, that is pretty much now ironclad evidence that it was a Islamic Jihad failed rocket that dropped on it and not an Israeli strike. But when it happened and the information came out, it actually derailed much of the discussions that were going on at the time. If we recall, our President Biden, was going to have a mini summit, if you would, in Jordan, with the Jordanian king, with the Egyptian president, and also the president of the Palestinian Authority. Mahmoud Abbas to kind of find a way for the humanitarian access for the future. So that derailed it. I'm not saying that was done on purpose, the falling of that rocket, but also we have to understand that at least 10%, again, these numbers fluctuate. People like solid numbers. Numbers fluctuate. But about 10% of the rockets that are fired, and there are anywhere between 5 to 7,000 rockets that have been fired on Israel in the past since October the 7th, do drop on before they reach their target, or before even they cross the Gaza-Israel border. How that information itself is used is very important. Namings are very important. You mentioned right now in the UN, as we speak, there's a large gathering at the United Nations, including representatives from countries such as Iran. Their foreign minister just arrived in New York this morning on the 26th of October, America Eastern Time. Their insistence is to look at Hamas as a liberation organization, a national liberation organization, giving it a status of like what has been afforded since Oslo to the Palestinian Authority. And they insist that this is not a terrorist organization. These languages matter. How we use these words as we go on, how these are framed. On Israel's part, they're looking at it at Hamas as nothing other than ISIS. So you hear the word ISIS being used, Islamic State in Iraq and in Syria. Later on, there's just the Islamic State. And that is because that was a terrorist organization that had pretty much no other objective other than this elusive objective of, first of all, killing and mayhem, and then secondly, to have a Islamic caliphate. And that's a maximalist position that Hamas has also taken. Hamas is not fighting for Gaza. Hamas wants the entire state of Israel. And this is very important. It's a very much a maximalist idea. Their whole existence, written in their charter, is the destruction of the state of Israel. And so we have to understand when we talk about these things, what is to take a side this way or that way, what is to be bogged down with numbers, or also the psychological warfare. So it's an information warfare which has an effect directly on the psychological warfare. This whole idea of how people were killed, the gruesomeness of it. They use it, the terrorists use it, because that is what terror is. The word terrorism, we're not going to go on the history lecture, but it comes in from the French Revolution. It is to scare the population, mainly the civilian public. That is what Hamas is doing. They are a terrorist organization. They are terrorizing not only the Israelis into achieving their goal, but also their own people. So it is important how we use these. As you said, numbers are important. Sometimes we ourselves in the academic world or in the analyst world get bogged down on what becomes like the tree and not the forest, as I say it, is beheadings. Beheading is a very bad thing. It has a psychological effect, no questions about it. Just we humans don't like our heads chopped. Somehow if somebody is shot in the heart, nobody talks about it. That individual was shot in the heart at a close range. But if you say that individual's head was cut off, has a major, I'm not going to go into the psychology of it, but these are aspects of this war. This war is very nitsy-gritty on those images, psychological, informational, and we cannot divorce it. Every war has it, going all the way to the Roman Greeks. Information warfare was used, but the speed of it, the ability to change reality, to fake reality is so much. The ability to politicize aspects of this war for political gain of whoever. Countries that are regional and directly involved, countries are one step further, or countries far away, is open. And that does affect the policies of those countries, but also affects the perception. So with that said, we were talking about the ground operation. Yes, Mr. Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, has stated it. Actually, this morning, early this morning, America time, East Coast America, United States time, the IDF actually has released a public statement and some footage of an incursion by Israeli forces into northern Gaza last night, Israel time, Gaza time, in which they entered, and they actually mentioned there was some bulldozers, and you could see in the images it was very grainy with what they posted on the IDF, Israel Defense Forces internet. It also showed some either tanks or armored personnel carriers, and what they stated was that this was basically an opening for the next phase. So they have actually already entered, and they, according to the IDF statement, they came back successfully for whatever the operation is. Of course, you will not hear the minutia or the actual tactical reasons behind that operation. So it has actually started in a way. So I leave it at that to your question, but there is you talked about the operational and the informational, also psychological aspect, but also the ground warfare. At least the beginning was it there. There's also these reports that are coming out that our country, United States, has asked for some restraint in time. Whether those are true or not, I'm just talking about the open media for preparations. Whether you always hear in the Middle East. Also, this is important: is that if this happens, the whole world will go crazy. This was stated in so many different aspects of Arab-Israeli affairs. If this happens, there will be such mayhem, nobody knows what will happen. And sometimes it is true, sometimes smaller events have created mayhem, and larger events, and then I can go on and I won't go into details. Larger events that everybody thought that when this happens, mayhem will break down, nothing really happened. So that's also part of that psychological information warfare. Not that we should not be ready, that if there is or should we say, when there is a ground operation by the IDF, that this all hell breaks loose regionally. It can break, that situation may happen even without Israel pushing for a ground offensive right now, but it could also not happen. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I read about that raid. I had seen that it was an armored raid. Raid being the important part of that equation, being that it's a short time duration. An assault assumes that you're going to take the position and maintain the position, whereas a raid is you are doing some sort of short-term thing and then you're going to depart. And what I had seen was that they were destroying essentially forward outposts almost. Yeah. Of Hamas in order to
some bunkers, earthen bunkers that were built on the Gaza side of the border.
Yeah,
this is according to the information that was posted again on the website of the IDF, that were there on the other side of the barrier, and it could be also seeing what's there. I don't know. Again, as I said, they provided just a short paragraph, and I'm just looking at that.
Yeah, I think that information piece that you're talking about, it was very interesting watching the progression of the story around the hospital, because the original report that came out was, hey, it got struck by IDF. It was struck by an air unit, and that, there were 500 dead, that the hospital was destroyed.
527.
Yes.
How did they know that? I mean, nobody asked the question, and the hospital was not actually struck, even if the missile is now sure that it was from Islamic Jihad. It did not fall on the hospital. That doesn't make it any better for the people who died. Hospitals are not supposed to be hit by anybody in any war.
Right.
It actually fell on the debris. Most likely, the fuel also came because it was on path to flight, on the flight path, yet not taking the proper. So the fuel was still not burned. It fell in the parking lot, and that created a fireball that killed all these innocent people. Yeah, exactly. The numbers come in, and suddenly that particular thing created so much havoc, both on the streets, not just of the Arab countries, but in European countries. Also derailed what would have been most likely a humanitarian. I'm not going to say it would have created a peace between Hamas and Israel. I don't think that's in the cards. Israel cannot make peace with somebody who came in to their country and butchered so many people. But it would have been a more understanding between regional countries. It would have involved the Palestinians, because, as I said, the end game of this, should Israel be successful in what they say, I think when you have the ground campaign, in my personal view, what we hear from the Israeli side, I don't think this is going to be a rush going in, and this is going to be very deliberate attempt to dismantle, as they say, Hamas's ability. They're not saying they destroy Hamas. Destruction of Hamas, some of Hamas leadership was living in very luxurious places outside of Gaza, most of the senior leadership. So the ideology you can't destroy. Al-Qaeda, we had a specific thing about Osama bin Laden. Al-Qaeda's ideology still is there. ISIS ideology is still there. There are also pockets of them around there. But it's the threat level, whether or not Hamas as an entity sitting right there can have the ability to do something like this again. I think this is what Israel does not want. It will be a deliberate, slow-moving clearing. It was going to be very, very, this is where information and psychology comes into this warfare, because things that will trickle out of that when it happens, it's going to be a lot of misinformation. And I think the Israelis are trying to tell everybody what they're trying to do, and about trying to kind of already talk about combat and non-combatant, about casualties on the civilian side that is unavoidable. They're doing all of that. And Hamas is doing the same thing, as you mentioned early on, that anybody who's killed, first of all, you exaggerate the numbers. By the end of the day, first of all, we don't have a perfect census in that area. And secondly, when you see they are looking, as you said, they're not talking about their own fighters. They're talking about children, women, which should not be. And nobody wants to kill them. Israel doesn't. It's what it is that creates also, again, a backlash, because they're hoping that Israel's window of sympathy that they have from a larger number of countries, the United States, I think, certain countries, Canada, I don't want to talk about other foreign countries, but our own country, I think we are steadfast behind our ally. But there are certain other countries that have a lot of, they are jumping in with Israel. And if this thing prolongs and they see mayhem and they see those pictures on their, TVs or computers, how long would that last? So these are questions that it's objective of the war, but also objective within what time frame. And I don't think my own view is Israel is not there to occupy what they did in Lebanon. That was not a good story for them to go there. And this is where the tough part comes in. What next? If I were in a decision-making capacity right now, as I'm preparing for war, and I know this is a tall order because they're very angry, rightfully so, and they want to go and eliminate this threat to them. The military aspect of it. It's the military aspect they want to eliminate. But at the same time, if they don't have a political solution, at least designed and talked about with their allies, United States, with Egypt, with Jordan, with the PA, and then Gulf countries, I think that we're going to have a problem. I'm not saying there will be any guarantee that a political solution that is even thought out well will actually go there and take over the situation and give Gaza a chance and Gaza's citizens, the Palestinians, a chance. But at least I think there ought to be a parallel track starting right now, if it hasn't already, and I'm sure it has, to look for a political solution. In the best case scenario, let us say Israel does as surgical as possible ground offensive with minimal civilian casualties. Just let us take, this is the dismantling Hamas's military power, and the regional countries do not involve themselves. Let us just assume that. Best case scenario, Hamas is defanged, casualties on the civilian side is as minimal as possible, and regional countries led by Iran are not involved. Think about that day.
Yeah, and I think we talked about this pause in time. I've read a number of articles and watched a number of reportings of folks that have been talking to soldiers in the IDF, and there were a number of comments of, hey, if we're going to go, we need to go soon because we're all on edge right now, and we're going to lose that edge, which I think was an interesting comment. You see a lot of folks that wrote about the wait prior to Desert Storm. I wonder if there's some more aspects to that, but I've seen different. Hey, the United States has asked them to wait because we still have a carrier strike group going in that direction. I've seen, hey, they're waiting because they've shut off fuel and electricity. They need fuel and electricity to man the air filters and air pumps to put fresh air into the tunnels they've built. So they're waiting for that. I think the best one today was that the Navy Delta Force was going to observe poison gas, the use of poison gas, and the whole thing just made me just chuckle because it's wrong on so many different counts. Going back to that IO question.
You know what happens because there's a Marine general retired who's there as an advisor. So of course you see that. Then also there was a report that a very fringe, even for Iran, but although they put it in newspapers, a pro administration in Iran. By the way, there is actually if you look at Iranian papers, there are no independent media, but there are more that are aligned towards the hard line, which is the current president and the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, and the president Raisi. And there are some that are more, they call it moderate, or they call more pragmatic, that are aligned more to people like Rouhani was a president beforehand. On one of the hardline papers this morning, the headline was that I think this came out from the Marine retired general being there, and also the Israeli raid. They said a raid by American and Israeli commandos was unsuccessful, and they were shredded to pieces by Hamas, and they ran away, taking their losses. This was it was in the papers in there. So that's what Iranians read, that the American commandos, i.e. special forces, with Israelis on the ground fighting and being decimated, literally said that they were cut into pieces. I read that this morning in the Iranian papers. So you're getting that kind of information in there. And again, we can look at each one of them. Some have very little effect. The people who read that and actually believe in it, you can't change their minds. But we just talked about the Al Ahli hospital. Now nobody talks about it. Even those some people still believe, no, Israel always lies, America lies. You can't change it. But anybody who knows anything about the technology, looks at the numbers, even now you have very reputable international news organizations that are putting down. New York Times actually backtracked. I believe AP has already said that there's evidence that this came from Islamic, a Palestinian group. But the damage is already done. On this one, the damage was very clear cut beyond all the upheavals and this, and it stopped a process at the very highest level of, I would say, 4 most important countries in that region, 2-3 countries in the Palestinian Authority, to find a solution, which I just said, that even in a very good, successful conclusion of this war for Israel, dismantlement of Hamas militarily, you need a political solution. And these are the countries that are central to that. And this one misinformation just took it all out.
Yeah, it makes me wonder about, I feel like we heard pretty quickly after they conducted this raid, and I hadn't read the stuff from the Iranian papers, but, if someone's putting out like, oh yeah, we beat them and they ran away, that's a very different picture than we did a raid, which naturally, as a part of a raid, there is a withdrawal to a different location because you have no intent on staying. So you need to put that story out there very quickly before somebody else puts out, hey, we beat them and they ran away.
Yeah, but also, of course, you add the gore, the decimated bodies of them, and and of course, for Iran. Okay, look, what Iran is trying to do is, because Hamas is part of its what they call the axis of resistance. It is their, some people call them proxy, longhand. This is one of the strengths of Iran. Hezbollah was the most successful one. Hamas actually is kind of interesting because Hezbollah is a Shia organization. Even before this Islamic revolution in Iran in 1979, the people who became leaders, Khomeini and others within it, not Khomeini himself so much, but others, had relationships with Lebanese Shia. So that is a natural one. And Shias are a majority in Lebanon, population-wise. So Hezbollah is the most successful of these enterprises where Iran has a long hand and gives it the right of denial. Gives it the right of denial. Hamas is not Shia. Hamas is an outgrowth of the Muslim Brothers, or Muslim Brotherhood, as people call it, Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimin, which started in Egypt in 1929. Absolutely not Shias, most Sunni, but at this point, the religious aspect of it has actually gone out, and it gives Iran a lot more power and more credentials in the Islamic world to say, look, who is the leader of an Islamic movement? It's not just a Shia Islamic movement. It is Iran, not, let's say, Saudi Arabia. So this is a much larger psychological, geopolitical game that Iran is playing, but they're playing it they're afraid. You see them over and over saying, we didn't do it. Oh, what do you think? The Palestinians cannot do it, but we always support them. So while they take credit, they're trying to have their cake and eat it. How long can they do that? That is the key. They celebrated, as I told you, there was a meeting today between Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, the Hamas, and this Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Lebanon somewhere. And while the Iranians were not there, at least not in that picture that was put there, guess whose pictures were on the wall? Two very large photographs of Ayatollah Khomeini, the founder who died in 1989 of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the current supreme leader. They're sitting right there. There are no Lebanese leaders in there, not even Lebanese religious leaders. They are talking, these three organizations, terrorist organizations, are talking under the two pictures of Iranian leaders. So the picture, they're not even trying to hide it. It's not like, some people put the picture away or get it sit in a room that there are no pictures if you don't want to convey a message. So the message is very clear. Yet Iranians are trying to play a very, very fine game. They're good at it. Is that, yes, we trained them always, but we didn't do this. They're on their own. So yes, we are, because if they say, well, we didn't do anything, then they lose that I told you that what puts Iran into a pedestal now, that they are the leader of the downtrodden. They are the leader for liberation of Muslims all over the world. They are the leader of Islam, the true leader, not Saudi Arabia or other countries who are playing fiddle with the West or trying to even have a relationship with Israel, which was a casualty now of all this. But at the same time, they don't want to be implicated. They keep on putting statement after statement that they didn't do it. So how long can they play that game is very important. How long can they take credit and not take credit? And on the fuel issue also, the fuel issue has become another one of those international games between UN, UNRWA, which is the UN organization in Gaza, and Israel. The Israelis keep on showing very, very large fuel depots, which are controlled by Hamas, which they say is the government of Gaza since 2007. So almost 20 years, 18 years. And that fuel, as you mentioned, is used for Hamas's war machine, not given to the hospitals or generators. And the question here is, who is responsible? So again, some of these will be, I'm sure, people who are not born right now graduate students who are right now students who write reports, and international lawyers, whether what it is, if you are in control, if you say you're the government, then are you responsible for your people or for that? But Hamas always has relied on UN, American, Qatari, other donations to feed the people of Gaza, taking credit for it, yet use the money that they get, some of that money, including the money they get from countries such as Iran, for their war machine. So again, they're doing this whole thing. Oh, the people are being hit, but yet their leaders are living in palaces. And these are all the stuff that information warfare goes on, eventually coming up. That will come up as well. So that's important for, again, the future of this. The future of this has to be somehow a finding a Palestinian leadership, which is number one, like the Fatah or the PLO accepts Israel as a country. Number two, cares about his own people. And it's not corrupt to the core. Once that is found, then of course on Israel's side, it's too early right now. There's a lot of pain, but on Israel's side, as I said, there has to be a willingness to genuinely discuss a solution to this problem that has been persisted since 1967. And then hopefully there will be that used to be the bedrock of American foreign policy. It had been up to I would say, President Clinton spent a lot of his time. President Bush tried. It kind of seeped off now from the perspective, basically saying, okay, this problem, there is nobody to talk to on the Palestinian side, and we just manage it. Well, now you can't manage it anymore. We just saw that it's not a manageable issue. It has to, and that, as I said, I keep on saying that some people may say, okay, right now the nerves are very raw, and yes, they are. And I go back to the history of country like Iraq, where we went. And again, we were not attacked by Iraq. This is very important. I have been in more than one place, even in 2007, right here at this university. I said that was the worst strategic decision we have made in the Middle East ever, and I still stick by it, the 2003 invasion of Iraq. But anyway, that's past. But what we have to learn from it, and one thing we have to learn from it is that we went there, we won the military, right? So swiftly, nobody knew what it was. I mean, Saddam Hussein was toppled in a week and a half, 2 weeks, something like that. We went in March and something by it. So we won the war. We lost the peace because we went without a plan. That's a fact. So, and that, again, that was not a threat to us. For Israel, it's a much, much more important threat. Number one is proximity. Look where Iraq is, look where we are. Iraq, and secondly, it's the issue of, for Israel, this is their security right there. We saw, right? You know, there are kibbutz houses a few kilometers away from that border, and there are people who want to do what they did to them. So how do you manage that before you go in and look at yourself at the best scenario and then what? So that's what I think because the reason I say that is right now we have a halt for whatever reason it is. U.S. request, Israel preparing what they did this morning our time, last night their time, preparing more, looking at what's going on, perhaps giving more time for some people to move south of the Gaza River. All these reasons, we still have a lull. This is a lull, because once that ground offensive starts, you and I will be talking much different aspects than okay, what the politics will look like, because it's going to be more on the tactical military side at that point, and what is going on, the speed of what it goes, and if this becomes a multi-frontal a war, Hezbollah starts more. They're already doing it. See, everybody's testing it. Syrians have lobbed missiles, and Hezbollah, but it's almost like a cat and mouse game so far in the northern front. But what if it starts fully? So I leave it at that.
Yeah, I know that there were, I think couple days ago, there was a strike on the airfield at Aleppo, and then like within an hour and a half, apparently, of them fixing the airfield, it got struck again. So it's interesting to see like where Israel is applying force. I do want to go back to the the UN aid portion, because some of the things that came out yesterday as well were, Australia just pledged an additional $15 million of humanitarian aid to Gaza, which puts their total aid up to about 25 million, according to the articles that I saw. And then China has pledged an additional 2 million on the 1 million that they'd already provided. All of this going through the UN.
Yeah.
I didn't see, because I know it early on when they kind of shut the borders and said, hey, there's no supplies going in. Like, I think there were threats that, hey, if you send convoys of supplies, they will get bombed. What has been the Israeli response to these countries coming out saying, hey, we are going to provide humanitarian aid financially to the people of Gaza?
Well, the trucks are coming now. Egypt, it wasn't just Israel's issue. Egypt was refusing to open the Rafah border crossing, which is the only way. So this is all the way on the Egyptian border with so the southern part of Gaza, which borders the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt. That has opened up. Israelis, as far as I know, they have not attacked them. They're allowing them. Again, we talk about 1 million from China. We, the United States, have given already 100 million. Somehow ours don't get the press, even if we do good. If somebody sends one plane, you see pictures of it. If we send 100 planes, nobody sees it, because, not really, honestly, it sometimes pains me as an American and as a taxpayer that we put so much, and we, instead of thanking, our flags are burned. So anyway, I leave that. But the United States has, in this conflict, yes, we have people say disproportionately giving aid to Israel. Yes, that's really, but we have pledged. President Biden said that so far the biggest chunk of money from any country. So yes, no, that's going through. What I do not know, I know that those trucks are coming in. The numbers are not the same as what used to be during the pre-7th October. That's very obvious. But trucks are coming in, and this humanitarian supply under those auspices, as you just said. Israelis have, so far have not attacked them or damaged them. So that's what the situation is, and eventually you need that, because if Israel again is heeded to, and more people leave or allowed to leave by Hamas, and it's not easy to displace people. People don't like to leave their homes. You have children, you have, people stick to their homes as much as they can. I'm a refugee. I know how it is to leave your home. Be forced. I was forced by the Soviets, so that's a whole different story. But if you leave, you try to stay as much as you can. But if they do leave and go further south to the Rafah region or to Khan Younis, they need to be fed. So I believe that Israeli policy will be, this is just my own perspective, not that to allow those and even encourage those to bring in food stuff, not anything else, to make sure that those people, if they leave or are pushed back, so that they have supplies, and most likely it's not just food anymore, because if you're displacing all that people, they have to have some kind of a dwelling. So I think at the end of the day, that UN presence becomes very important. The question here is again, goes back to trust. The trust deficit between UN and Israel has never been good. And now it is very low. You mentioned the Secretary General, Guterres, from Portugal. Now you have he said Israel, this attack of 7th October did not happen in a vacuum. And Israel came out, their ambassador to the UN came out and personally complained and even called Habib to remove him. So this puts them in a situation where there's no trust built, and that's parts of this war is where you have this agencies that are supposed to be not taking side, like the Red Cross never takes side. Doctors Without Borders never take sides. They tend to injure it from all sides. But if there's no trust between one side and the other side, seeing that aid giver as a partisan, that creates a lack of trust, which in case also trust makes the job for those aid agencies so much harder. Another thing that I want to mention is we're talking about regionalization, which I hope it doesn't happen, but militarily, but also there's I am as I just mentioned, I became an American in 1980 after the 1979 invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviet Union at the time. So I'm a product of the Cold War. I'm smelling and hearing Cold War things, not just, we had this whole idea of major power competition, which is very active. China is one thing, but we have a semi-warm or hot competition with Russia in Ukraine. It's a proxy war in a way. But now you hear it that, again, Israelis yesterday at the United Nations Security Council, they openly challenged both China and Russia. That is something that sounds very much Cold War-ish, because Israel was having a pretty good relationship with China. Trade was incredible, even transfer of technology. And with Russia at one point, it was very close. That, of course, kind of cooled off during Ukraine. Israel never took sides for a long time. Let's not forget that. Even the United States was, our allies, NATO allies, were adamantly supporting Ukraine militarily. We still are doing it. Israel did not take sides for various reasons to keep that channel. I think that's broken. Because now Russia is fully on the side of the group that supports Hamas. Mr. Lavrov was in Iran. There's that shift happening, and you see countries trying to jockey for who's going to go where. In the Caucasus, you see that. In Armenia, you see that. I think we are at the cusp of a major change. We were thinking few years ago, or maybe that it's going to be a competition between China and America for the supremacy and for dominance. Yes, that's still there. China is going to be the winner in that, unfortunately, because if we are engaged in all these conflicts, it will weaken Russia, but it also will weaken us. But I think at the same side, everybody's getting involved. The Chinese are putting if they put 100 and we put 1,000, they get much more credit for it. But they are bringing their ship. The Russians are involved. But they, you know what I'm trying to say. I think the time where people were on with Russia and America, with China and America, or our group, the NATO group, I think it's becoming more and more divided. Ukraine had a major part in it, but now this division, and it will put a test on a lot of the countries that have been sitting the fence, being chummy with the Russians and being chummy with the US. China is still the same thing. You can still be chummy with China and US and China and Russia, but US and Russia plus Iran and its proxies and its grouping, I think that time is again, I'm just speculating. The language you hear is very reminiscent of language which you heard during that Cold War, where there was a very direct division. Thankfully, we never confronted each other directly, but on the political side of it, on the geopolitical side of it, it wasn't, there were very few countries that were kind of pink, as we called it. You had India, you had Yugoslavia when it was still intact, but the rest were red or blue, if you would. You see what I'm saying?
So and I think that Cold War analogy is interesting. I think the one thing that I would think about, though, is there were a lot of those countries that aligned themselves with the Soviet Union that didn't really have a choice based on proximity and where lines were drawn post World War II. I think the difference today is some countries, I think there are still some nations that probably feel obligated to lean towards one side over the other. But I feel like countries might have more of a choice, which I feel like says more about them than, where they align themselves during the Cold War. I think the countries that are aligning themselves more with China I think those lend more towards, where we saw countries aligning themselves during the Cold War, just because, China's investing so much money in a lot of these countries that they feel obligated to align themselves with those countries because of it.
Right. Again, China, I'm not talking much about China for many reasons. Number one, I full disclosure, I do not cover China. I do not speak Mandarin. I see China when it comes to my part of the world, which is the Middle East and Eurasia, Europe. But on Russia's side, that idea of Russia being kind of there, yes, was never really a Western power, but as part of this solution, I think that window is closing. I think it's going to be much more either or than just both. Again, I'm not saying China. That's why I think China maybe, if they play their game right, they're patient, they're going to be there because they're, first of all, not in war. They're not spending money on, like we are doing it. We're borrowing so much money. I'm not going to get into our own domestic politics ever, but anyway, I'll leave that. It's Chinese money, by the way. So China is sitting there, and yes, sometimes by the hook and sometimes by the crook, they are getting more and more allies, investments, obligations that those investments create. But with Russia, I think there is a change happening. There's a change happening, and it has to do with philosophy. And this is why I bring the Cold War issue. For Israel and for some European countries, it used to be very much ideological. Russia was a communist, at least declared communist. I don't think Karl Marx will ever say that was a communism, but anyway, a declared communist country, and so ideology played a major role. Today, it's not communism. Russia is not communist, but it is a ideology which is basically Russia's ideology right now. Is, if you look at it, the basic ideology is the destruction of the Western model. That's it. China also says to it, but Russia's idea is that the destruction of the Western model is their goal. They call it many names. That includes, they say that, that West has also abandoned religion, Christianity in that case, that they're deviant and they're this. But it is that idea that an America-led Western alliance has to be dismantled. And Israel was kind of in between. I think that's changed. In case we're talking about Israel and Hamas war right now. In the case of Israel, I clearly see that shift happening. In the case in Ukraine is, I think, changing now. That's just I'm trying to various aspects of this war and how much effect it will have, and issues long term, very long term. This is very long term, and then short term, and also the psychology, the psychological warfare, the information warfare, and also distraction of the United States. If you look at our posture, the printed postures of the place where you and I work for, read it. How many times Middle East is mentioned in that?
I mean, not as many as it used to, for sure.
Yeah, it's once, actually.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to be, I think that's a major change is going to happen to that, because the reality is, looking at that, you just said it. Now we have 2 aircraft carrier groups there and a marine amphibious landing ship. That is, numbers matter. One thing that when I travel to the Gulf and to Arab countries and talk to them, one thing that they were saying about commitment of the United States to the CENTCOM area of responsibility was that, when was the last aircraft carrier that came there? We stopped sending them. Not that an aircraft carrier was doing it, was just symbolic presence of an American, force. Thankfully, they were not using them. They would just go and come back. There was a routine, if you would. Secretary Mattis, at the time he was Secretary of Defense, he changed it first. That I think it was the ship that I was on board once, USS Harry S. Truman. Instead of going from the 6th Fleet to the 5th, which was the way to go from Europe going into the Middle East, it went north. For the first time, it actually went to joined with Norway and all. Of course, that was a call because of what was happening with Russia, but that stayed because the theater changed. Pacific, of course, was number one. So the Indo-PACOM became number one, and then European Command, that side. Well, now I think you're going to see much more importance given to the Mediterranean. Because why? Not just because of Israel, which is very important to us. It's beyond an ally. I always say that. But also because it's involving that larger picture.
Yeah.
That's where we are right now.
Yeah, and I think that, so far for the carriers, we've only seen pictures of refueling. We've seen, let's see, I saw KC-135 squadrons have entered the region. F-15, F-16 squadrons have entered the region. A week ago, the USS Carney had an engagement. I think it was, what I read was over a 9-hour period, shot down 4 cruise missiles and 15
from Yemen,
drones.
right? From the
yeah, from the Yemen. And all the articles I read were like, hey, they weren't sure where those drones or missiles were going, but based on the trajectory, Israel was the most likely. So now you're getting attacks from not even neighbors to Israel, but other folks
that's
that want
the
to.
axis of resistance, as the Iranians call it. It is the Iranian-backed Iraqi, Afghan, Pakistani, whatever they are, Syria and Iraq, which are hitting our bases, right? And Hezbollah, obviously, Hamas, and the Houthis. That's what's going on. And that drone that was shot down by the U.S. Vessel in the Red Sea. If you read the Iranian reporting on that, it's just incredible. That basically the ship was sunk always. I mean, that's what they say. So again, it's not that they ever correct it again. Right there, it also maybe there's still newspapers. They get happy that an American ship is hit, or sensationalism, or the hope they have. But the news has become so flagrantly wrong. But we have to see that the people read that. And who you trust is also important. And this is, again, what I said about EUN. We need to have bodies that are trusted, at least to a level, by all sides. To some level, I'm sure there's always a differentiation of how much you trust one side versus the other side. But in order to create eventually a reconciliation, a post-war solution, so Israel is safe and the Palestinians have a dignified life, you have to have trustworthy partners. We are not that. That's the problem. United States is not trusted by many of the regional players, even our allies, just because we have. And I'm not against it, but the way we are portrayed and with the way we have backed our ally Israel has made us not a partner that people think that we are fair. So yes, we may be very important. I would not say indispensable, but very important in creating the situation. But there has to be parties in there that are have more credibility, like Egypt, like Jordan, like the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia specifically, but also the United Arab Emirates and all these countries that are regarded and have good relations with us, but also are regarded as more, with more credibility than we are. And that is how you look at these things. So, but we know you have to build confidence in order to start that peace process. I talk about all these peace processes because, as I said, I think as this gets nastier or more, I shouldn't say that, but it gets more kinetic, we'll discuss that just the way it is. We are the PME. But that's what I see it. And I'm part of my teaching is American foreign policy and the geopolitical aspect. So it keeps on coming to my head as, how does this fit to American geopolitical thing?
Yeah.
Because especially this one, because Ukraine is one thing. We had a lot of sympathy, people flying the Ukrainian flags on their houses and all that. Israel has a whole different aspect. For many reasons, I'm not going to go into the detail, but people know what I'm talking about. So it is much more closer, and how that manifests itself in our political parlance, and how that balances out with Ukraine and all that. That becomes, again, domestic, and I stay totally clear of that.
In the last episode, you had talked about, hey, this attack has kind of set Israel up to, before they were supposed to be a military that was going to be very hard to beat. And we found a chink in the armor almost. I was learning about Iron Dome and Iron Beam last night, and the things that I had seen that in the last 12 years prior to October 7th, the Iron Dome had shot down about 2,000 missiles over the course of that 12 years. And now you mentioned the 5,000 to 7,000 missiles over the course of 19 days. And so, and that has forced the speed up of the implementation of a system with Iron Beam ahead of schedule. And I'm starting to wonder, how many more systems are we going to see from Israel that they've been producing that we're going to see earlier than intended, and probably far earlier than they intended as well.
Well, there's one that has already been used, and we don't have time for it. Maybe in the next episode, I'll actually specifically discuss it, since it's publicly known. I think you're going to see much more things that are maybe in production coming in. This is how most weapons show up. Humans see a situation coming in, and then you have something in the R&D, you push it forward. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. So I think you're going to see much more of that. Yes, I think that is key for Israel to reestablish that deterrence. Not in our mind, but in the mind of the enemy. Destruction of Hamas is that. But it also has to be that Israel has the deterrence to safeguard its own people. This has never happened in the 48 years of Israel. The worst breach of Israel's intelligence and all that was 73. Again, it happened in a place that Israel had occupied that was not part of their territory, far away in the Sinai Desert, and they reversed it very quickly. It actually went into the Egyptian territory. That was dramatic and traumatic. And political changes were happening. This is unprecedented. So there has to be that, and how that manifests itself. Maybe we should, again, as I said, if there's not a major change where we have to talk specific on action oriented, we can discuss that aspect of the deterrence and the reemergence of that deterrence and how it looked like. Again, I leave you are the host, I'm the guest, so but I will, I put that on the table.
Once again, Dr. Tarzi, thank you very much. It's always interesting listening to you make your comments. So with that, we're complete for the day. So go ahead and carry out the plan of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. As always, we depend on support and feedback from the Team Krulak community to constantly improve our offerings and reach a wider audience. So if you have feedback on this episode, please take a moment to fill out the survey linked in the show notes to help us do better. Also, if you have enjoyed this episode, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel on YouTube, or leave us a review on the podcast app of your choice. It truly does help us reach a wider audience. Thank you as always for your support, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.